So first of all, I want to thank and welcome everybody that's here in the room with us right now, and thank everybody that's joining remotely. It's the first hybrid session that we've ever had this particular week. We had a couple of technical difficulties in the earlier session. We believe we've got it all worked out this time. So, you know, we're constantly learning and constantly evolving, and we appreciate everybody's patience. If you do have any questions at all, we are going to be taking those all through the app called Slido. There'll be a QR code up on the screen in just a moment. Please post your questions through Slido. We don't have the ability to take any hands up as far as the questions go. The people in the room with us here now will also be posting their questions through Slido, and you'll have the opportunity to vote for each individual question as well. Here we go. There's a QR code for Slido. Please feel free to use it if you're in the room or if you're remotely. We want to ensure that everybody has the same opportunity to participate. We will be doing our best to cover the questions. I know that we ran out of time in our previous session for answering questions. Also note that we're only going to be answering questions applicable to this particular panel. If you do have questions that we believe is deemed more relevant for another panel, we will tag it for that other panel, and we will try and cover it during that other panel. Otherwise, we will attempt to reply to you separately later, probably later this week or maybe even next week, and get back to you. We're not ignoring your question. It's just a matter of making sure that the questions are relevant at the time. So thanks again very much for joining us. And as we were first starting to develop this particular panel, we were trying to think what would be the best way to do it. And there's so many wonderful organizations that we could have had to come and sit up here with us and talk about why they use APSCA member firms and auditors. And everybody's got a slightly different journey. And I think up here with this panel of 4, I think each one of them at the table have pretty much had a slightly different journey. So I look forward to hearing from them and having them share that. But going back to when APSCA started in 2015, we started with only 9 founding audit firm members. And what those firms did after formulating APSCA in the first place, the very first thing they did was form a stakeholder board. And that stakeholder board was made up of representatives from brands and retailers, collaborative programs, as well as an independent. In 2016, we actually launched our very first working groups. And again, the executive board or the founding members wanted to make sure that those working groups were reflective of all the different stakeholders that were vested in what APSCA were doing, that were, you know, some of the ones that were really crying out for an APSCA type organization to start. And I think it's also important to note that APSCA was the 6th attempt by the profession or by the industry to professionalize. So we had a lot of great learnings to take from the previous 5 attempts, and certainly the founding members used those learnings as they were starting APSCA as a whole. In 2016, we actually started working groups. We had representatives from each of the categories from the stakeholder boards. We also, so the working groups themselves were about 4 or 5 people. We also had consultation groups. In those consultation groups, there was about another 20 or 30 people, and they actually helped those that were actually doing the heavy lifting, providing comment and feedback along the way. Those consultation groups, from memory, it's kind of casting our mind back 6 years, but from memory, those consultation groups were meeting with the working group about every 2 to 3 months to make sure they were able to provide that comment and feedback. And we were even able to have one in-person meeting as well. And ultimately, the output of those working groups did go to public comment. The output of those working groups are now what is known as our Code and Standards of Professional Conduct, as well as our competency framework. And both of those documents actually form the foundation of APSCA's exam, as well as the Ethics and Integrity Program. APSCA does value feedback, and we are continuously able to improve because of that feedback that we receive from our auditors, from our firms, as well as from other interested parties like our collaborative programs, at the brands and retailers. All of that feedback is very valuable, as well as a number of conversations that we've had with a number of the government agencies such as Customs Border Protection, ILO, IOE, IOM. I think there's probably a couple of more I's out there that I've missed out, but you know, all of those organizations are just so invaluable to APSCA being able to continue to improve. We knew all along that success was never guaranteed, it was never ensured, and we knew that it wasn't going to be easy. Hence, it was a sixth attempt by the profession. But we had a great group of people that have constantly sat in there and providing that comment and feedback. And, you know, some days it's 2 or 3 steps forward, some days it's 2 or 3 steps back, and sometimes all can happen at the same time, and you just feel like you're spinning around in a circle. But I do think that it has been really important and really invaluable as we continue to take those learnings. If you were able to join the panel, which happened earlier, or just a couple of hours ago, on evolving landscapes, which Linda and Avidis were both part of, there'll also be another panel happening on emerging issues, which are focused on freely chosen employment as well as pending legislation. Those are all as a result of a lot of the comment and feedback that we've received from many interested parties. We also have a presentation on Thursday, which is our keynote, which is focusing on public trust as well. And I think that's going to be great for us to take on board from a social compliance perspective. So one of the things also that APSCA formed in a way, APSCA was formed in a way to develop a method for us to validate the competence of the auditors that are going out and conducting those audits. And I think we heard a little bit about that in the Evolving Landscapes panel, as well as what are people looking for when they are receiving a social compliance audit. You know, if you weren't able to participate, I do highly recommend that you get in with the recording once it's been published and go back and have a listen, because I think it was quite informative. You know, there are times when social compliance audits are exactly what's needed, and there's other times when it needs to be a little bit more. And I think us understanding that difference, I think we heard quite well from Customs Border Protection on why using the 11 indicators of forced labor, which is part of the APSCA exam, is also extremely important for our auditors to be able to understand. So moving on from that as well, a couple of the other elements that we have within APSCA is we've got a web page on our website which has a portion for auditors, or sorry, for whether it's member firms, whether it's for programs that are receiving audit reports, brands or retailers, or factory owners or owners of any place that's going to be audited, where they can go in and they can actually check the auditor that's come on site. They can check the auditor number, they can check their status, and they can check their level. And it's really quite interesting, because I know when we first started this, you know, we weren't really sure what the take would be on that, but it is one of the most visited pages on our website that we have. And we didn't quite appreciate that until one day when the site went down. Just that one page went down, and the number of emails we got that day going, how much longer? Like, we're waiting for this information. So it was quite exciting to know that so many people are out there checking those numbers, making sure those auditors are at the right level when they're receiving that audit report. Sometimes even people are asking questions about auditor numbers and auditor names that are on report, and the report itself could even be, you know, 12 to 18 months old. And of course, our website is very focused on the here and now, so it tells you what level they are today. It doesn't necessarily tell you what level they are, you know, 12 months ago. And so we do get those questions asked. So hopefully, I've sort of given you a little bit of a background, but one of the things that we want to do is I want you to not just hear from APSCA. I want you to hear from the collaborative programs, because that's one of the questions that we get asked the most, which is why we decided to do this particular panel just with collaborative programs, because it is really one of the most frequently asked questions that we get is, so what about the collaborative programs? What do they think? What do they want? You know, do they care? Do they not care? And I think hearing from, as I said, the 4 people on this particular panel who have had a very different journey along the way, and there's been, you know, a lot of change in even some of the thinking, and a lot of consultation and discussion with them to understand some of their concerns and challenges, and all of that has continued to make what APSCA is today. So on that note, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand over first to one of our panelists, and I'm going to get each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and then I'm going to also ask them, as they introduce themselves, to answer one question to start with. We've got lots of questions here, plus we can already see more questions popping in. But in addition to introducing yourself, why does your company use APSCA members, and has that changed over the last 5 to 6 years since APSCA started? And I'm going to start with Jeanette.
Thank you, Rona. So my name is Jeanette Mensink. I'm Executive Director for the Social and Labour Convergence Programme. Very briefly about SLCP. It's a multi-stakeholder initiative started 7 years ago, same time as APSCA started. And we developed a converged assessment framework with the idea, we heard it in the previous panel, there's a lot of audit fatigue. Can we join hands and align ourselves around a common framework? With the idea to redirect resources towards improvement programs and also provide an opportunity to have comparable data that can drive transparency and data insights. We have come from far, and Rona, I don't know if you want me to tell the whole journey or maybe just focus on the summary right now, and then if you want I can expand on it more. So when SLCP started the implementation, which was in 2019, we had come a long way with, right now we have more than 250 signatories. You can imagine to align all of them to come up with one common assessment framework and one set of criteria to manage the quality of the assessments. And we had to create something that was acceptable to all. And with, say, our mind of inclusivity, we had some things that we were really firm to align with APSCA, and some things were just not supported by all of our signatories. So we've taken a bit of a step-by-step approach. We signed a collaboration agreement in 2020, which had a couple of components. One of the key ones was around sharing information on auditor, in our lingo, that's verifier, integrity issues. We had also mirrored the APSCA requirements for verifiers in our application process to become an approved SLCP verifier. And we've all anchored that in our terms of use. So there is also verifiers, when they come on board, they know that we have the right to share information with APSCA. That worked well, and we saw that also there is, I think, a bit more of a natural progression and acceptance of the need for professionalism. We also see that even today, last year, we had 80% of our verified assessments. Today we are around 7,000 assessments a year, but there was already 80% done by APSCA members. And we have now, our council has made a decision in September to even further progress and align with APSCA. And that means that we will basically go full on under some conditions that we're also negotiating or discussing, because we're friendly organizations with each other. We're discussing with APSCA, and Rona's, I believe, discussing them in the board. Happy to give more details later, but maybe first hand back to you, Rona.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and pass down to Avadis. We're going to have some follow-up questions in a little bit. But Avadis, do you want to introduce yourself again? Because not everybody was on the last panel. Introduce yourself again, and then answer the same question about why does RAP use APSCA members, and has this changed over the last few years?
Thank you, Rana. Yes, I am Avadis Seferian, the President and CEO of RAP, Worldwide Responsible Accredited Production. RAP is an independent social compliance certification standard focused primarily on the SOAM products sector. We are the largest independent such standard for that industry. And the reason we use APSCA is really very simple, and Jeanette alluded to it, and the previous panel spoke about kind of the evolution of the landscape, and how we have come to realize that social auditing is indeed a profession. 25 years ago, when we first got going in this space, it wasn't really clear what it was we were doing, and it took a little while to figure out, exactly what it takes to call oneself a social auditor. There was no standard curriculum. There was no standard job description. There was a time when, quite frankly, anyone could do a social audit. But as we have evolved and as we've seen the sort of myriad skills it takes to be good at this, we have understood that, well, no, not everyone can do a social audit. And guess what? Not everyone should do a social audit, because then you just get yourself into trouble because you just don't have the skill sets to provide the kind of competent, independent evaluation of credibly gathered data to be of service to a certification program like RAP or any kind of assessment operation when it comes to working conditions at a production facility. So the need for some kind of professional body for this space became apparent fairly early on, just as you think of any profession, right? You think of lawyers and the Bar Association, doctors and medical boards. So that need was apparent early on, and as Rana pointed out, there were attempts to stand up such a body that have created sort of the foundation of learning that led to eventually this attempt, APSCA, that's now been up and about for 7 years. And the success that it's had so far and the bar it has set for what it means to call oneself a social auditor, these are critical and honestly, at this point, foundational things for this industry. So RAP has been a supporter from the beginning. As you mentioned, Rana, one of the first things the founding 9 audit firms did was create a stakeholder board. And I think you and I are the only people here who were on that board originally, and I'm still on it, and your role has evolved. And it's been, in that sense, organizationally as well as personally, a commitment from the get-go, all in, because we recognize the necessity of that professional stamp in order to qualify someone to be an auditor. And then the individual programs can take that qualified person and, in our case, rapify them, or whatever you want to call it. But we do not need to, I don't want to say concern ourselves with, because we are concerned, right? We do not need to take upon ourselves the burden of teaching them how to audit before we teach them how to do a RAP audit. So we'll delve into this a little bit later, I assume, but that's kind of the fundamental basic starting point. You want qualified, competent people doing these social audits. APSCA is a foundational, critical element to get us started. So RAP's been supported from the beginning, and as I said, it's been a personally important thing for me as well. So that's the story, and I'm sticking to it.
So we're going to pass on down to Linda as well, who's also a stakeholder board member. And she's been a stakeholder board member in a couple of different capacities. She's been an interesting one. You've kind of moved categories. But I'll let Linda introduce herself now.
Yeah, thank you very much. Linda Kruming, president of Amfori since 1st of January of this year. Before that, I worked for Samsung Electronics, setting up the global labor human rights framework and the stakeholder engagement related to that. And that was a lot about issue management, stakeholder management, and also about the quality of the audit. As you may know, Samsung is a member of the Responsible Business Alliance. And as part of the internal discussions, and that brings me the link to what you just said, we had an internal discussion that I felt it was really very important also for Samsung to be connected to, say, the credibility of audit standards. And that's indeed when I joined the Stakeholder Advisory Board. So I think APSCA, for me as a person, is important because I think we need this International Bar Association for a profession. And I was really happy to continue on the Stakeholder Board in my capacity as president of Amfori. What is Amfori all about? We offer support to our members, 2,500 company members, to help them on the due diligence journey, whether it's environmental, socially, or on governance aspects. And one of the, we have a code of conduct that is relevant for the social standard BSCI, but we also have a environmental performance initiative that really assesses, say, the environmental impact a business partner or a supplier has. As part of that program, but it's not the only thing, I said it in the previous panel, is an audit or an assessment. It's not the start, it's not the end, it's part of the cycle because continuous improvement is what comes from it. But coming back to the audits, we do around 37,000 audits a year, and the far majority of those are still social, but we see environmental going up. What we say is crucial for us as a scheme is credibility and integrity. If we can't guarantee that, why would companies want to be our member to start with? That's why we need APSCA. If we look into the journey with APSCA, I can tell you now that we work with what we call, say, accredited, say, auditing companies. We've got 13 today that work with us, say, globally. Not everyone in every country, but one of the requirements we have with them is you must be an APSCA member and your auditors, your social auditors must be APSCA certified. So it also means, therefore, by default, if that auditing company does not fulfill those requirements, you cannot do business with us. So talking about how we have evolved, say, in our journey, I think that's the stand that we currently take. And we also, if that comes with consequences, we will take the consequences and we'll find solutions. Because we need that credibility. And I know we're going to dig in that one a bit deeper, but we know there's scrutiny. Not everyone takes auditing or auditing schemes or collective schemes for granted. And quite frankly, some of this criticism is also right. Also, if you look into Amfori, there is things we can do better and we should do better. And we are having conversations with our members about how that should look like. One of the projects that we have undertaken is what we call our Audit Integrity Project. We did a pilot in Vietnam, we did a pilot in China to really understand, say, if we look into the auditing results, what is it we can learn from that? Where can we maybe see that, copy pasting in text has been used? So we've done quite a few, I would say, an in-depth analysis on that one, supported by KPMG, but also with support because APSCA is on, say, the board of that project. So we really value, I would say, the input being given there also from APSCA, and I think that shows our collaboration and why we view APSCA is really instrumental. And then there's one other thing to add. Those who heard me speaking in the previous panel, sorry if I repeat things for you, but we do not want to duplicate and avoid that where we can. So I mentioned already we have as 8,000 audit results within our system. We were also going to make sure that we have a connection with APSCA to make sure that we have, for example, the auditors, that you mentioned, say, on your webpage, are within our system to avoid that members need to go to different systems in the same place. So I think these kind of integrations, and this is just one example, will help us move things forward, but also help us to be more efficient because our resources are not unlimited. So we need to spend them wisely here and also collaborate on issues and problems that concern all of us. And I think I also see, therefore, APSCA as a big convener. And we have legislation that's already either being in place, such as in Germany, or European one that is being put in place. We also will need APSCA, say, as a strong voice in representing the industry to be there and have those conversations with policymakers. So that's a bit maybe my ambition here as well, but I just wanted to put that out, why we view that Amfori, or so the APSCA is very important to Amfori.
Great, thanks very much, Linda. And next we've got Carol from ICS, who we've had a long-term relationship with, but probably in the last year we've spent a lot more time sort of having a chat. So I'm looking forward to hearing you share with everybody about our journey as well as introducing yourself.
Thank you, Rona. I'm really pleased to be here today. So I'm Carole May. I'm the General Manager of ICS, Initiative for Compliance and Sustainability, and I've been managing ICS for about 10 years. So I remember the first meeting together with Frank here in TÜV and Olivier in SGS explaining the goal of APSCA and the purpose of APSCA. So we were working with all the audit firms having built APSCA in the beginning, and we are still working with most of them. So we have decided to work with 11 audit firms, and we are closely monitoring these audit firms too. The monitoring of the audit firms and the skills of the auditors are a big challenge in the industry, and we have to recognize all together that this has been the main challenge we have faced to provide to all the stakeholders the credibility of the social audit system. Social audit is not social compliance. And social audit is a part of social compliance, and it has been challenged and by all of the stakeholders. It has been challenged, and after the Rana Plaza, and I remember the discussions we have with the national contact point of the OECD and all the stakeholders, all the institutions involved in investigation on about social audits and the way we are performing audit all together. Of course, social auditors are our key partners, and we have to work all together, and we have to recognize first the challenge faced by the auditors on the field. We are used to shadow audits. We are frequently on the field with the auditors, and I recognize some of the auditors I have shadowed doing audits in the farms, in the agriculture industry, and we were discussing about the challenges faced by the auditors and the way we have to provide information to the SMEs, to the industry about the purpose of social audit, and this has to be done together. We are facing more and more regulations, and in France we are the champions of the regulation, and it's always difficult to explain why in France we are so different of the other of the world, but we have also to answer this regulation and maybe explain why in the system we have to work closely to engage with the stakeholders, and the stakeholders are first the brands that have to commit and have to engage in order to apply the due diligence, and they have to monitor the subcontractors, they have to monitor the supply chain, they have to be transparent, they have to trace their supply chain, doing first the risk analysis and then engaging with their partners that are the social auditors to explain to the SMEs how human rights due diligence are so important and have to be proved to the consumers at the end. So we have to work together on that, and this is part of the monitoring, this is part of the trainings that have to be provided to the auditors, because they are not alone. They are the key partners to translate to the SMEs all around, and we are closely working with them in 73 countries right now within ICS. We are performing about 5,000 audits, because the audit is not the solutions by itself. The audits should be accompanied with commitments between the brands, the suppliers, the factories, and our goal is to improve at the end the social compliance, whatever is the tool. So social audit is a tool, and social audit is a tool to provide information about human rights first, and then to ensure that human rights improve all the fields, and not only about social audits, but social environmental change and climate change and so on. Environmental topics have also a lot of impacts about social issues, and so we have to build together a common field, a common level playing field in in order to translate this information to the SMEs and to engage them in the same journey.
Great, thank you very much. Linda, you want to add something to?
If I may, and this is maybe just maybe my perspective, but I don't think that social audits per se are a tool to educate. I think the capacity building, and probably that's what you meant, but just wanted to clarify that the capacity building should take place before an audit. Ideally, I know that we not live in an ideal world, and that so that a supplier, wherever the audit is taking place, is prepared to take the audit and not start from scratch. So I think I absolutely underline capacity building is key. I'm not saying that the social audit per se is a capacity building tool. That's maybe just nuance. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much, and thanks for that clarification. I want to ask one clarifying question to Jeanette. Is as we were looking at and sort of thinking about some of that journey that we've had, I can see you're looking, going, my God, what's she going to ask me about through that journey that we've had? And you know, through the time, I know that in the last couple of years, you guys have made different expectations of firms or auditors that want to come in, or verifiers, as you call them, that want to come in and start doing verification for SLCP. So I just wonder if you can talk just a little bit about the difference that you have between if they are already an APSCA member, auditor and or firm, versus the non-APSCA members.
Yeah, so we wanted to incentivize our verifying bodies or verifiers to become APSCA member. And what we did is that in the application, when verifiers or verifying bodies want to be part of the SLCP approved partners, we have said, so if you are already an APSCA member, then you can skip a couple of things. But if you're not, you can still, I just mentioned that we have mirrored our requirements. But if you're not, for whatever reasons you have right now, we will do what we call a verifier check, which is at management level of the firm. And for all non-APSCA members, they need to go through that process and they need to pay for it themselves. So our verification oversight body will do that on an annual basis. And for the ones who are APSCA member, they pass through that. But for the non-APSCA members, we have that, additional check. And probably your next question would be, how did they respond to it? I think we have, and I checked it with my colleagues, it was generally received well. And I think they also see the changing landscape and they see the growing role of APSCA. So probably also a bit for them as a glimpse on what requirements we would ask and whether that could be an easy transition in future to become APSCA member or not. So they did not push back on the effort. They did not push back on, the costing that we charged to them. And some of them even appreciated the transparency that we used in it, and also the fact that we were able to identify a couple of items where they can enhance their management systems, their trainings, and happy to then report back, well, we've concluded that and we're ready now for the next stage.
So that's really it's been some of the first step towards more mutual recognition, right? Is being able to recognize the ones that have already been through the application process of APSCA, the auditors that have been through the exam, and I think there has been a recognition, and that's evolved over the last 5-6 years as well, which has been great to see and be able to partner with you on that. So this is a question that I'm actually going to pose to everybody. But there's been recent articles, and I think we talked a little bit about it in the previous panel, but there has been recent articles which has been that real call about collaborative programs not necessarily being considered valuable role to play within the HRDD, the human rights due diligence. And what do you see as APSCA, as well as programs that are here and other programs that haven't been able to join? What do you see about them being able to, or all of us being able to come together, work together, so that we can start to talk a bit better and more broadly about the value that collaborative programs do bring to the profession as a whole? So what I might do, Avadis, is maybe kickstart with you, if that's okay.
Sure. I got nowhere to be. And I have a pretty strong opinion on this, as you can imagine. And I guess I'll start not by suggesting that the articles that are out there are flat out wrong, but to point out something very critical that I fear they don't make clear, and the media as a whole has not quite shone enough light on, which is this: not all programs are equal. Right? These articles have a tendency of lumping all kinds of, social audits into one category and tarring the whole thing with the same brush and saying, "Oh, these are bad. They're not going to meet MHRDD requirements." This is important to understand because, to the extent that they are talking about really crappy, what we call the drive-by audits or the non-independent stuff, the articles are correct. Those programs are not really social audits, are not worth the paper they're printed on, and ought not be seen as credible and meeting MHRDD regulations. Folks who were in the room and who were listening earlier on the previous panel, we got a really good exposition of what a good program should look like from Therese Randazzo, the director of Forced Labor Division at U.S. Customs and Border Protection, when she described how a program that they would find use in would have to be independent, would have to be credible, would have to actually focus on the specific things that are being assessed. If it's forced labor, then you want the ILO's 11 indicators and the like, and have to be done by credible independent auditors who know how to gather that data in a way that will give them access to what's really going on. So if you look at those programs, and I would argue some of those programs are represented here on this panel, you will get a much different picture for what value you are receiving in that audit report. Those can play an important role with regards to meeting MHRDD requirements that the legislation that we've discussed is putting out there. And critical to that, the second part of your question, and every one of the programs out here has made clear, is the understanding that any audit, the good ones and the bad ones, is only as good as the quality of the auditor conducting it on that particular day at that particular location. So you cannot be a credible program if you do not have that auditor credibility at the front and center of your own program ethos. Which is where, again, APSCA becomes such a critical piece of the puzzle, because you're not going to get the value out of the audit. And this is the other thing that those articles that criticize the space get wrong, right? You have to understand what audits are for, and by definition, what they're not, right? You've heard me use this adage a number of times, Rana. When you say that you do not fatten a pig by weighing it. Right? You've heard this, right? You do not fatten a pig by weighing it. If you want to fatten the pig, you got to feed the pig, right? But you absolutely have to weigh the pig as well to determine what its weight is and what needs to happen to get it to the level of fatness, or fatity. Whatever level of rotundity the pig has to be at before it serves its purpose, right? The audit is the weighing exercise, right? It is not what's going to make that pig fat, but it is an extremely important part of whatever process you want to put in place to fatten the pig. So if you're criticizing the space for not fattening the pig by looking at weights and measures that are flawed, and expecting just the weighing to fatten it, you're deluding yourself. Okay? And as you can tell, as I said, I have a strong opinion about these articles. But to the extent that they point out that there are bad weights and measures out there and that they don't fatten the pig, they're correct. But you have to understand that you got to use the good weight and measures, the good programs, and you have to understand that their job is to give you that number, that information gathering exercise, credibly done, based upon which then action takes place to set the pig's diet. You know, I can torture this metaphor forever before we get to where we're getting to. So that's kind of where I will leave it, and I will say that to be that right weight and measure, the program has to be credible, and the measurer, the auditor, has to be certified, credible, and that's again where APSCA comes in. I think I'm going to have pork for dinner tonight.
Yes, I think we're definitely going to get Arvid's a pork schnitzel tonight. Thank you very much for that very passionate response to that, and I do love the pig metaphor. But I'm going to hand over. Jeanette's got something that she would love to say. Want to hear?
Yeah, so Avdis and me are friends for a long time, and I'm almost vegetarian. Despite that, not because of you. But I wanted to, so agreed with the points and with that some of these reports are biased or one-sided or maybe unnuanced. I do want to elevate the discussion a bit, because the fact of the matter is that we have these reports coming in, and there are more and more. Only last month, 2-3 of these critical reports, and we need to deal with it, because we I think all in the room agree with the fact that social audits, assessments are one piece of the puzzle in terms of due diligence. The spotlight is now by some activist organizations put on social audits or social auditors, with some maybe unvalid criticism or unnuanced, but also some criticisms that I think we need to all take at heart and somehow need to engage with that. So I see a couple of roles for APSCA, including the one on enhancing the reputation of social auditors, because otherwise we're going to lose this battle. We need proper, credible, actionable data. The only persons that can help us with that are the social auditors, but we need to make sure that the ones who are driving this discussion, the policymakers, whether that's in Washington or Brussels or wherever in the world, they need to also understand that there is value of some or more than just some systems that are already out there, and they need to be able to put it in context of what is helpful and what we need to do with other measures. So I think there is a role for APSCA to engage with them, these organizations, in a constructive way, hear the criticism and see what role APSCA can play in that.
Yeah, I fully agree with Janet, because we can indeed criticize those reports, but there is a grain of truth in it, and whether they are biased or not, I think we need to engage in a conversation. And I think the key thing for us is we need to explain better what we are, but also what we are not. And I think we also need to be very clear about the limitations that we have, but also be more transparent about what we achieve, what we not achieve. So one of the things, and I don't have the solution here yet, but one of the things that we started discussion internally within Amfori is how are we going to show our collective impact as a scheme? And that's not an easy question for me to answer to, but I think that's a relevant next step to be made, not only for Amfori, but probably for all of us, because that's going to help our members and companies also to report then on their either individual or collective impact, because I think that's what we need to move towards. And again, I haven't had the solution here, so come back to me in a year or 2 years to see where I am. But I really truly believe that this is what we should move towards. So it's also about transparency, and again, and I said it before, I'm going to repeat it again. You said it. We are a piece of the puzzle. We can help companies, in their human rights and environmental due diligence journey. We cannot take over their responsibility, and we only see part of this landscape because they have pieces of the puzzle that we don't even see. So what we can help them with is completing the entire puzzle from their perspective to allow them to make a good a risk analysis about where to focus their resources on, and then use credible audit schemes. And then I would like to add one more thing about APSCA, about why APSCA is relevant. I'm a true believer. I always believe in good intentions, and I always believe in people until they've proven me wrong. I trust people until they've proven me wrong. And I think the same goes for auditors. I trust auditors until proven differently. We've got a system in place to assess that, but if and when it is assessed that an auditor is abusing, is violating the code, has not high integrity standard, is being bribed, then there should be consequences. And those consequences should not only be that auditor cannot work for me anymore to do an APSCA audit, but also that auditor is then not allowed to work for anyone else, because that's part of the APSCA system. So I think that's maybe one thing we haven't said about why APSCA is relevant, but for me that's an important element just to address here as well.
So we are facing altogether criticism. However, social audit is also there to open the door of the factory. And often where we are not open, when we are not able to open the door, where we are not there concretely on the field, it is where we are facing most of the challenges regarding forced labor or a major risk for human rights. So it is really important to discuss about this altogether, because we have to adapt the profession and the behavior of the auditors to face this criticism. We have to hear about this criticism. And for instance, by default in the ICS methodology, audits are semi-announced or unannounced. It is the system by default. In the top of that, the auditors and the audit firms are chosen by the brands, not by the factory, not by the suppliers. And they are the brands that decide, based on their risk mapping analysis, about the audit campaign and about the audit firms. This is really important to apply the due diligence, and this is really important to explain that the social audit is the starting point of the corrective action plan and is the starting point of the remediation. So it is the brands that has to discuss, to debate with their factories and their suppliers to help with the remediations. It is not the purpose of the auditors to define about the remediations, but it is the purpose of the brands to work with their subcontractors.
Thanks very much. That was good. There's actually a question that's come through through the chat, which I want to pose, and it's probably to anybody who'd like to answer it, but probably from an auditor is my guess. Is credibility of auditor really the main quality factor in a social audit? Isn't duration critical too, and shouldn't schemes establish a duration of more than 2 days? I mean, it's greater than 2 days, and I think the question of the duration of an audit is such a big question. If you've got a factory of 10 or 20 people versus a factory of you think about Foxconn and how large they are, it's hard to sort of say every audit should be X period of time. But I think I don't know where the question just disappeared to. There we go. Is credibility of the auditor really the main quality factor in a social audit?
I would say no. Of course, to some extent, they need to be professional. They need to understand what they're looking for. They need to understand the métier. I think that's where it starts with, and coupled with credibility. Because if I've got a very credible auditor, but he doesn't understand what needs to audit, what's the point? And so I really would like to say it takes. Those two elements are both equally important. So someone needs to understand the métier. Like Janet says, we give credits to those who already are an APSCA auditor. I think in the BSCI system, the same. Part of the training is being reduced if you're already an APSCA auditor. But you need to know, what you are looking at. Otherwise, why are you an auditor?
You want to pass it to
Yes, on the top of that, we have done a lot of analysis and statistics on that. And it depends on the factories, not depends only on the auditor. It depends on the way factories are organized for their documentations, are able to provide all the informations. And if the factory is not compliant, the audits will be delayed a lot. But sometimes the audits are completed in very short times if the factory is able to provide information and to use to audit. So it depends sometimes on the countries. Depends. We are facing this issue in countries that are not so used on audits. We are performing a lot of audits and more in Western Europe or in South America, not only in Asia. In Asia, they are used to audits, but they are not so used in Italy, in France, in Spain, and sometimes it is linked to the way factories are able to provide and are willing to provide information and are organizing the audit too. So so this is linked also to the way we are providing information about the audit methodology before the audit, not only about capacity building, but informing about the requirements and the methodology, and to help on the top of the audit, before the audit, the auditor to get all the information. And this is linked also to the technology provided, and we have updated our database to provide a lot of information to the factories and the suppliers before the audits by the factory profile, and we are help on that with the International Trade Center, in institutions, UN agency, a joint agency from the UN and the World Trade Organizations, and we have developed a link between ICS database and sustainability map in order to show to the factories and the suppliers that they are committed with us, with the brands, to the same sustainability journey. It is not the social audit by itself, alone, out of nowhere, but they have to understand the requirements too.
Yeah, as Linda said before, you know, it very much is a piece of the puzzle, and it can't be looked in isolation for sure. And I think it's the same with the auditors. The auditors is such an important part of the audit, but they're still a part of the much bigger picture. Did you?
Well, when you read the question that way, in my mind, the answer was yes. And so I thought, well, Linda said, no, we're going to have a disagreement and here's some drama. But it turns out we don't disagree, because when I hear credibility, it isn't credible if you're only looking at one part of it. Credibility is an interesting word. And for the audit to be credible, every facet of it has to be credible. You're not going to have a credible auditor doing a crap program that, you know, involves only 2 hours in the factory. Duration is a factor. So credibility is a composite of all the pieces coming together in all the ways that Carol and Linda have already described. So unfortunately, folks, no drama here. I don't end up disagreeing with Linda. But yes, credibility is what's the most important thing. It just has to be looked at holistically.
Yeah, maybe just also, and again, no further drama, because I agree with Avdiz and Linda on this one. I would want to say, and maybe that could be also something that I would be interested to hear from APSCA, but also the other panelists. I believe that there is indeed the piece on the quality of the social auditors, but also there is really a responsibility from the schemes to address the needs and to make sure that there is also sufficient space and the preconditions are set for a credible social audit. I'm seeing in the social media, on the grapevine, there's a bit more of the complaints also around, say, do social auditors have sufficient time? Are the tools too lengthy, too complex? All of this is, say, in the gray zone between what's the responsibility of social auditors / APSCA and collaborative schemes like us. We can leave that discussion to the market or to a new initiative, Or is there a space maybe that we collectively try to take a responsibility? And from my part, at least we can already offer that maybe we can channel back some of the feedback that we collect, which is always a mix of the tools need to be clarified or whatsoever, or also a bit more on those areas. Maybe there's an opportunity that we once in a while check back with APSCA and see who can take which role in that.
I think, and I think it's really important to listen what the feedback is. So we have what we call annual calibration sessions with our auditing companies to go through many themes, including this one. I also understand that, and I know that I was offered a job as an auditor in the previous panel. No, just joking, which I refused, just to be very clear. I think it's a tough profession to be in, because indeed you are going from one to the other. Sometimes, there's a lot of travel in between. So there is a lot to be said that I think it can be a very rewarding one, but it's also a tough profession. And not always working in the most ideal circumstance, and also maybe not always being most warmly welcomed if you enter into a site. So we all need to acknowledge that one. What we, I don't know exactly the size, say, of each of every audit, because it does depend on the size of the site with us. And it's absolutely far more than the 2 hours, because sometimes there's criticism that it's being too expensive either. But we have included an or half a day to write up the report. And we need to prevent, say, that auditors, are doing that in the spare time in the evening. So it's integral part of the audit that they get enough time to make a good report. I think these are also elements where APSCA maybe could look into, because yes, we acknowledge there is shortages. That was part of the discussion that we had in the previous panel as well. Yes, we need to prioritize, but maybe part of it is also what is that we need to do collectively to make the profession more attractive. Is there certain standards that we can set that whatever? It's normal that you get time to write up a report. I don't know what kind of rules could we stay there.
Thanks very much. It actually kind of brings me to a question I was going to ask much later, but I'm going to go ahead and just ask it now, because I think it ties into the conversation itself. So, as we think about the auditors, and we are an association of auditors, and the auditors are so invaluable to everything that we're doing. And I think as we think about when we travel to our job, and for me, I sort of walk from one room of my house to the other room of my house, but some people do get in cars. But auditors, every day when an auditor goes to a job, I mean, their day could involve planes, trains, and automobiles. They might cross every form of transportation just to get to their job that particular day, because it's not very often that the factory or the farm or the manufacturing place that you're visiting is even in the same city as where these auditors, the auditors work at. They're sleeping in hotels, and I think that's one of the challenges, and also one of the challenges of us attracting, new people in. Now, having said that, some of the value, and as I've talked to some of the firms about the auditors and the workloads that they have, some of the value in the auditors traveling to all these different places is they are exposed to a whole lot of different types of issues. And I know it's one of the, call it complaints, and I'm sure it probably really is a complaint, is when people go and they sit through some of the APSCA exams, they're like, well, that doesn't happen where I work. And APSCA was never established to certify auditors in a country. Our exams are not country specific, and we make sure that the questions that we're asking across our exams are quite broad, and they cover multiple territories. Partly also because we want to make sure that auditors understand and know some of these nuances, because maybe it's not common, to have inconsistent records or to have, harassment and abuse in certain countries. But certainly if the auditor doesn't know how to identify it or address it, if it is happening, then they won't be able to see it because they don't know what they're looking for. And so that's really, as we've been looking at APSCA. So it's one of those plus minuses. I think for some of the auditors that are certainly traveling and they're outside of their jurisdiction, I think that it really adds a huge amount of value to their knowledge and experience, but at the same time, it's exhausting for them. And I do actually have a question in all of that. So thank you very much for allowing my soapbox moment. But I do think that, and I fully support what you say, Jeanette, and it's actually on the list of some of the things for us to do next year, is to talk about, what can we do as the Association of Auditors, along with collaborative programs and probably many brands and retailers to have their own programs as well, to think about how can we work together to improve our processes, because we all know we can improve, right? It's about continuous improvement. It's about constant improving. We've got auditors located in 105 countries. So things also with these auditors are always going to be somewhat different as well. But I guess it's sort of thoughts and ideas. Is it setting up a grievance mechanism? Is it setting, are there any ideas, and I know this sort of coming a little bit out of left field because it wasn't initially thought about, but, are there some ideas of ways in which we can help and work with auditors to give them, that additional voice at a time when things are changing, things are evolving quite rapidly. And, when APSCA first started, it was about building that foundation. And it was driven by the firms, and still to a large degree is driven by the firms, because the firms are still funding, are still funding this. So, what can we do to start taking those steps towards ensuring that the auditors have an additional voice, and maybe get their feedback on even what they feel maybe us as programs can also enhance? I don't know if anybody's prepared to kind of talk about that, because I know it wasn't really a posed question to think about. Carol?
Thank you for these questions. I think this question is the most important one. So we have to work with the auditors in order to help them. They have challenges on the fields, and their professions is really difficult. We are facing this always by shadowing the auditors. I've done shadow audits in Spain, in France, in Brazil. This year in March, being in 18 audits in Brazil. I've done so in Morocco and Tunisia, and in Bangladesh, and together with the M4E, and in China some years ago. And the auditors have not exactly the same expectation, same challenges, depending on the countries. They have not the same recognition. For instance, I was really surprised that in Morocco and Tunisia, the profession is not really recognized. They always want to be consultants, but not to stay auditors for a long time. However, in Brazil, they are really proud to be auditors, and they love the professions, and they are really recognized to help the factories being more compliant socially. So we have to understand them and to help them. And for that, we have done last week. We were in Turin with our team in the office of the ILO International Training Center, and we have a partnerships with the ILO International Training Center. We have done a full day training of the auditors that we are working with in Italy, and we have done exactly the same in Sao Paulo. We have done the same in France, in Paris too, some months ago, and we are completely open to other initiatives. Also, the training we are building, we are currently building. We have partnerships with the International Trade Center, so UN agency, and with the ILO. We have discussed this also with Rona. We think that there is an important need for trainings for the auditors in order to help them to communicate with the same words to the SMEs, to the facilities on the field, to help them to show to the factories how important are the social audits, to help for social compliance, to help for human rights due diligence. And this is not only, as I've heard sometimes during the shadow audits, it's not only the requirements of the brands. There is a common leverage to be applied on the factories to help for social compliance everywhere, but to help to apply the due diligence, to improve the social impacts, to improve also the social impacts that will be difficult in the coming years due to climate change, to environmental crises everywhere, and so on. And so it is really important to help the auditors to build this wording together, to understand what are the constraints also, because the brands have to face also constraints, and to help them to communicate this to the requirements applied to the factories. So the approach should be constructive, should be collaborative, but so discussing together with the auditors, who are used to meet every 6 months with all the audit firms to discuss with them about their challenges. And we have heard in the past months, in the past years, they are also facing recruitment issues. So we have to build all together, and the APSCA can be the good organization to do so. We have to build system that make the auditor job attractive. And this is the major challenge that we have to face together.
Yeah, thank you. So trying to bring it back to your question, Rona, and maybe if I just try to provide the perspective on what I as a representative of SCP, one of the collaborative programs, see as the role for APSCA, is that I think ensuring and enhancing the professionalism of social auditors, it's creating more capacity. I think we heard a loud scream on that in the previous panel, and it's working on the reputation for social auditing in general and social auditors specifically. I think all these three are interlinked. And then there's also, say, a responsibility for APSCA, and there is a responsibility for schemes like us. And to your specific question, do we need a grievance mechanism? I don't know specifically if we need a grievance mechanism, but I do think we need a channel where we get feedback from the field and can jointly discuss what we can do about it, who takes what role, or what do we need to do collectively. And the last point I wanted to make on that is that I see it's happening right now outside of APSCA, outside of our schemes. So we rather be part of those discussions than having another parallel system being set up, because we have too many systems already in our industry.
Yeah, if I just may add, because I was also wanted to come back to the grievance systems, because there is already grievance systems in place. Amfori has already a long-standing grievance system where anyone can bring in a complaint. That includes auditors, if they have not been treated well, or if there were issues, and they use it. Then there is the other grievance channel. I think that's through the auditing companies, who are the employers of the auditors. I assume they have a grievance mechanism in place for their internal auditors. I think what we need to do is connect the dots. How do we get all those issues, in an aggregated manner, in such a way presented that we know what actions we need to take? What are the top 3 issues that we would need to solve, and what would be then solutions? I think here again, it's about connecting the dots. I don't know if APSCA in itself needs to open up a grievance mechanism, but I think is already something on there. So it's just connecting all that information, and then make a nice cake out of that one that we can then say, this is why we're going to do it, and this is when it will, trying to go back to your pick here, and this is when, we'll have a nice cake, and solving the issues that everyone is being happy and pleased here. So that's the one thing I wanted to say. The other thing is, and that's another thing you said in your comment, is about the voice of the auditors in general, in APSCA, which is, they are now indirectly included via the auditing companies, who are the employers of them. I think maybe that's a discussion to be held within, say, the governance of APSCA. I don't know how it should look like, but we all know there's auditors outside who are not particularly happy with some things that happen, and we need to find a solution to include them in a meaningful manner.
Yeah, I'm not sure I like the idea of pork in my cake, but we could give that a try.
I was trying to get
Food. I like food, that's for sure. I think we've had far too much agreement on this panel, and I'm just going to pile on as well. There's nothing I disagree with, but there is a but there. So again, sincerely, nothing that was said by Carol or Linda or Jeanette about sort of their response to your questions I disagree with. There absolutely has to be a role for the auditor in a professional association, as any professional association has to, draw upon the professionals that are doing the work. But what I want to be cautious about and suggest, as Carol pointed out, there are nuances. This is a global industry, and obviously how it's perceived in some places differs from others, and that's no different from any profession, right? Some have it better than others. Most doctors in most parts of the world are seen in a positive light. I wouldn't say the same holds true for lawyers, for example, right? But the profession's role isn't to go in and sort of address pain points that are specific to geographies or caused by particular programs, but rather set the standards for what professional looks like across the board. So APSCA should, I would say must, play a role in setting that. So for example, if we are seeing as a recurring challenge that auditors are simply not being given enough time to write reports properly, then it would be incumbent upon the professional body to say, as part of the profession, you have to be able to do it this way. Just like the doctors are told, hygiene is an important part of performing surgery. This patient's life depends on being saved, but if to save it, you got to, do the operation in a sewer, the doctor's going to say, I can't do it because that's going to kill the patient. Right? So things like that, as setting up of standards, APSCA should, I would say must do. But this isn't the same as a, hotline or a grievance or, an auditor's union, however way you want to put it. That's a different role that there may well be a call for. I don't want to dispute that. I'm just saying that the professional body focuses on helping the profession by setting standards for professional conduct. These are the kinds of things that we need to focus on. So when you hear about sort of lawyers and their professional commitment, not only must they follow the rules, but they are bound by the rules to report others that don't follow the rules. Right? Setting those kinds of standards is what makes that profession elevate the conversation, as Jeanette was saying. So that's the real role, I would say, for APSCA. And some of that comes, a lot of it comes from hearing the feedback from auditors, and absolutely you must take that into account. But the mechanism by which you are effectively going to bring that forward is through professional standards more than anything else. So that was my one semi-contrarian point to make. Otherwise, in agreement.
Fantastic. Okay. So we've got a number of questions coming in. I'm going to try and sort of consolidate a few of them because I think there is a few questions to the collaborative programs about, being an APSCA member, being an APSCA auditor. If it's seen as being credible, why then by default does everybody not accept every single member firm and every single member auditor into their program? And whilst I'll push it back to the collaborative programs if you want to reply and answer. But ever since the very beginning when APSCA started, one of the things that we did say is whilst we are, enhancing the professionalism, we're setting some standards about what the expectations are. The one thing that we were not pushing to do is to say to all the programs, whether they're brands, retailers, or collaborative programs, is that the intent is not that every single person can audit to every single program. And I believe that this sort of came out in the previous panel as well as it's been said here now, is there are a lot of different programs, and you know, some may be you know, thought to not be as fantastic as others, but at the same time, those programs still very much play a specific role. I know I've had a conversation. There's one particular organization in Australia that they solely focus on farms, and farms can be, you know, different from a manufacturing facility, and you might not need as much time on a farm. It doesn't mean their program is not credible. It just doesn't meet APSCA's definition of a social compliance audit. And I do think that also, and each one of you sort of alluded to it, is there is a ratification or, you know, a SLCP, I don't even know if I've got a fication that is needed for auditors. And if there's, you know, each one of them have spoken about the number of audits that they do per year, and it ranges. And, you know, if you take about a program, I think you said you do 7,000 audits a year. Carol, I think you said you did about 8,000 audits a year. We've got, you know, 4,800 auditors. We've got 55 member firms. So that means each auditor is going to do 2 audits. I mean, there's also an economics of it as well, I think. And so it's not to say that the programs don't see the auditors or the audit firms as being, and I'm putting words in each one of your mouths, so feel free to jump in. But I don't see, just because the programs don't work with everybody, is not that they don't see the system itself as being credible. But I think there also has to be a place where you can only physically work and manage with so many different firms and so many different auditors. And I think that we have to appreciate that challenge as well, is that it can't just always open every single door. I mean, we've got a couple of brands and retailers here, and, you know, if I think about how many audits I believe you do a year, and I'm looking at Todd Nash from Home Depot, how many audits he does a year, I mean, that might be 1 audit per auditor. If we were to sort of say you have to accept everybody, and I'm not sure that would be good for the auditor and good for an individual program. So I don't know if anybody wanted to add. I know you grabbed the microphone and I rambled on, but
Yeah, I just want to underline, yes, you are an APSCA certified auditor, and yes, you still need to go through the BSCI program to understand what we are asking for. Mm-hmm. So I don't think the one exclude the other, but you just need to have both.
Mm-hmm. But I think part of the question was, why don't you accept all 55 member firms as being a BSCI partner?
Okay, well, that's a fair question. I think we, Fraser, where are you? Because he would know the answer to that question. And he's not in this room. Now, we have 13 at this point in time. I think that's enough for us, to cover, our needs. I think that's one element. Secondly, I think if we have all 55, that also from a managerial capacity, that would mean something from an employee perspective. Yes, that's why we don't have all 55. But at this point in time, we're happy with the 13 that we have.
Capacity is a very important issue, and we are facing this more and more because post-COVID situation is a very tense situation too. As the audit firm were used to provide auditors that sometimes were from Morocco, being able to do audits in Poland, it's no more possible. And so the auditors should be located in the country they are when they are performing audits. And this is changing the rules too, and so we are really concerned about the capacities in every country. We are working with 73 countries, and we need to have skilled auditor in every country, dealing also with different industry. So not only we are not performing only we are working a lot with electronics, with furniture, with with food industry and doing more and more audits in the farms also. And so we have to work on that, being ensure that the rules defined also together with APSCA are possible to apply everywhere and are implemented step by step in order to ensure that we have enough capacities in every country.
I think in general I agree. I think I just want to lay out that there's also an issue with that. Because if there is not enough supply in the sense of enough audits that you can give to an auditor in a specific country, that's where it becomes very difficult. So if you want to move to new countries, and I can also see that within Amfori, chicken and egg discussion. Huh? Yes, you need to have trained auditors, but if there is no audits for them to be conducted, why would they start doing the training? So and I don't have the solution to that, but I just wanted to point out that that's an issue. So it's not as easy as said, we need to have them all countries. We also need to have enough work for them to do so. Yeah.
Yes, and just to add that the sourcing zones are changing. And we have also to adapt and to align on the demand. And the demand is changing, maybe less in Asia, but more and more in closest countries. And to be completely clear, to share an experience that we faced last week, we were not able to shadow so many audits because we didn't have enough capacities of the auditors in Italy. And we have this concern everywhere in Western Europe and Eastern Europe too. We don't have enough auditors currently in Europe globally, but also in Morocco, in Tunisia, in Africa globally. But the sourcing zones are really changing.
So between pigs and chicken and eggs, I'm getting hungry right now. When's dinner? Let me add this. The capacity discussion that we've had here between Linda and Carol is very important, very relevant, and a big part of the answer to the question you asked. But I would suggest that even if there is capacity, even if none of that was a problem, the question still kind of gets it wrong, because you're conflating a couple of things here, right? If you have a commercial driver's license, it doesn't mean that FedEx, UPS, and DHL all have to hire you, right? Taking that examination isn't the job application for those companies. It is a necessary but not sufficient condition for meeting that role, right? A sine qua non, but it doesn't guarantee the job. So even if there was capacity, programs have whatever ethos it is that they're trying to build that is relevant to their needs and relevant to their processes and over and above what APSCA would provide. So, as I said, the capacity part is a big part of the question, but I would submit the answer to that question. I mean, even if there was capacity, you're conflating these two things. It's not the same. Taking the APSCA exam is the first part. There is another part that is separate, and you have to do that before you can do this. But doing the first does not equate the second to doing the second. So I will just add that to the answer to that question.
Okay, sorry, I thought somebody else was going to add something there for a moment. So there's a question here. Well, there's a question here, but I'm going to read it out because I want whoever, most of these questions end up coming up anonymous, but I just want whoever knows that we are going to add that to the list of things for us to talk about when it is about bringing auditors and making sure that we've got the perspective of the auditors. So one of the question was, are there venues for auditors to share social auditing best practices with one another, and could APSCA and or the partners support this? And this is something that actually internally within APSCA we have been talking about for a little while of what is the best way in order for us to facilitate that. So it is something that we have been looking at because there are a lot of great best practices that people can share, and we do want to provide a platform. Part of that does come down to a a data system or a website, or how do we structure that. So just know that it is actually on the things that we have been talking about. We haven't come up with the perfect solution yet, but we will continue to focus on that. And if somebody knows of one that's already out there that we can tap into and work together, it's not necessarily about recreating new wheels all the time. So I'm just looking at some of these questions here. If you do have any more questions, our little Slido QR codes is missing, but hopefully you guys are already on Slido and that you can post your questions up there if you have some more that you want to have asked or have answered, I should say. And I think this kind of falls into one that we've actually just answered, but what is APSCA doing in order to ensure that auditors are not conducting back-to-back audits, including traveling time, which has to be considered? I think that kind of goes back to another question that was also asked about, whilst as a program, we're hearing that you guys are saying that there's time built into the audit to write those reports. Some people are feeling like maybe they're not actually getting that on the other side. And I don't know if that is because they feel like they're traveling or if it's being combined with something else that they're expected to do within the firm. So I think that's probably something that we can take on board ourselves as we're looking at this for next early next year to, what are we going to do? Okay. I am going to ask Linda a question. It's not a surprise question, but I'm going to ask Linda a question. So M4E and APSCA have actually been discussing this for quite a while, and we were actually in the process of building the link between our data systems, and this does tie in with the question that was submitted as well, but creating that link between our data systems, and then our data system decided that it wasn't going to have a very happy year and sort of, started to crumble around us. So we're sort of limping through to the finish line on that one. But as we were talking about it, the value and the long-term value to M4E's overall process, what we were providing that link to was you've already got a number of auditors in your system, and sometimes duplicating efforts, as we do, of keeping some of that information updated. Within our system, and we both have, GDPR very, very top of mind, and we don't just share everything because not every auditor is approved to do M4E, and we've got a lot more information in our system. So one of the steps that we've made within APSCA to, and it's part of the annual consent that all the auditors do provide, is if on their accreditation page of APSCA's data system, they've noted, any one of these programs and more that they're approved to audit to, at the point that we're able to build this link, and we already actually do it with SEDEX, but build it with some of the other programs, it will push information to those programs on the level and the status of the individual auditor. And I guess, so my question to you, Linda, is how else do you see, or how do you see that information going back or going at the moment as a push to you? Ultimately, we would like to be, pulling some information back in return. But as a push to you, how do you see that adding value to M4E, both short and longer term?
Yes, thank you very much. I think, again, it boils down to being efficient, say, with your resources and don't duplicate work. Because if we have this link, and I think it's now scheduled for the beginning of next year, so we had to postpone a bit, we will get there ultimately, is that we have in our system, we have, say, what we call APSCA Auditors, and APSCA Auditors, and there's a whole system that where we go through to check whether or not they meet the qualification, etc., etc., etc. So we had to review the CVs, the audit log, the history, the training history, etc. With APSCA, if you can, say, pull that information together, it would take away quite a bit of the workload to do the same thing again. So that's one, I would say, added value of building that connection. So we can also more easily and regular update, say, our auditors base from that perspective, because we got the information at hand much more quicker. And I already share that we have, say, our own, say, BSCI training program that an auditor needs to go through. We have revised our BSCI Code of Conduct and also involved public consultation. We have revised our system manual. So it also means that, say, every auditor needs to be brought up to speed about the changes within that system, to perform as of next year, I would say, based on the new Code of Conduct and the requirements. But in general, say, in the collaboration that we have, it is quicker to train, say, a BSCR auditor if, say, CSCA is already held, and it reduces also the number of witness team audits to become a lead auditor. So there is benefits in that one too. And I think ultimately, and that's a bit more longer term, is to allow CSCA audit to be, say, to lead an audit to, and therefore, we reduce admin hours and admin system in that one. And if there is auditors not in good standing, they will be kicked out of the system immediately without, say, further, they will be, say, removed from both lists. The data link, I think, but it is moving forward, and I think also you have probably some perspective on that, Janet, is that, again, here it's about connecting the dots. So what, say, from aggregated data, not from individual data, what is it that we can take from there to learn and further improve and enhance, I would say, quality, but also address issues within the scheme. So this is a bit one thing. I don't know if the link also will give us further insights into the topic that we already touched upon. For example, is there enough working hours to really, to conduct the audit, or should it be longer, or do they have enough time? So we do measure that, say, as part of our audit quality program. I don't know if that's also, could that be something in the future to be included here too? So I think there's probably much more things to be thought about, but let's start with the basics first, and then go to the next steps.
That's right. It's we're trying to get those basics started right now, and I know it's working really well with SEDEX. So we're really looking forward to, and we got lucky. We got that build with SEDEX before the system decided to. Yes. Not sure the really polite word to call it, but the system decided to just change itself, reinvent itself. So we're sort of managing to deal with that. There's one actually here. And I want to try and rephrase it a little bit, because part of it is talking about capacity. Part of it's also talking about sort of back-to-back audits. Some's talking about also timing. And sometimes I wonder, if sometimes there's a bit of misunderstanding, and certainly from my perspective, I would think that if somebody was giving, and this is a question for probably any one of you, if within your programs, if you give, say, 5 days to write a report, does that 5 days start from the first day of the audit or the last day of the audit? Like, what is the timing when you have a report writing requirement? And maybe that's a tough question for, because you're not into the nitty gritty maybe. But Avidis, maybe
It's a very easy question. Report writing is a standalone activity, so it doesn't matter how long the audit is. If you recognize that it's going to be a long report, you allow for more time. But the point I'm getting to is the answer is whatever amount of time is allotted for writing the report is a standalone amount of time. It starts when the audit's over, and you begin the activity of writing the report.
And then, so for the timing of submission, then is the expectation, and just say for argument's sake, it's a 3-day audit, and they have a half a day allocated for writing the report. Would you then expect the audit at the end of the 4th day? And what about the quality control process that maybe it goes to once it's finished?
Yeah, again, that's an easy question. When you have timelines for report submission and all, you start with the closing meeting, basically. That's when the clock triggers. The audit's over. You now have this many days to whatever, or this many, that's the timeline. I don't know of any program that would do it differently.
That's what I wanted to clarify, because I think there is the question here was more like, well, if you're already on site for 4 days and you only have 5 days to write the report, then the report's due the next day. And I thought that maybe that was a misunderstanding. But Carol, did you?
For us, the report should be submitted within 10 days after the audit. So it implies times also for the reviewing team. That is also really important in the auditing process to review the audit and to align to ensure that everything is aligned on the ICS scheme too. It is really important to understand that the responsibility is, of course, from the schemes, but not only. To share experience on that, we have also experienced some different practices from the audit firms, sometimes dealing differently if the auditors are freelance or employees. Sometimes we have some audit firms that allocate some days for their auditors to write the report, but they are not allocating the same times for their freelance auditors. And the freelance auditors are able to organize their time by themselves, but sometimes it's not also the good way, because they are saving times for the Mondays, and then they are not organizing the transportation in the same way. They are not organizing the day off for report writing in the same way. And this is something that we have to address at the scheme level also, to ensure that the audit firms are managing their freelance auditors in the same way than their employees.
Okay, sorry, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to say I don't know exactly our timelines on that one. Just
That's fine.
pleading guilty.
No, that's fine. I didn't necessarily expect everybody to have the answer. I just really, because there were so many questions about it, I just felt like I wanted to raise that. SEDEX were not able to be here today, but Alison actually did send a few comments that I want to make sure that I share. And so some of the original question that was asked of Alison is to sort of talk about the way that our partnership has sort of evolved over the last few years. And Alison Hudson, her message was that SEDEX has been supportive of APSCA since its creation, and this support was further enhanced 2 years ago when they adopted the rule that only APSCA members would be considered approved as SEDEX approved audit firms. And they've continued with this, with the integration of APSCA certified auditors, and where only the registered or certified auditors are allowed to lead a SMETA audit. And I think that's one thing, as I said, they were the first collaborative program, or actually the only collaborative program at the moment that we've built this link through. And that was one of the call it problems they were trying to solve, was to be able to keep that information updated. And so the link between our two systems actually updates, I think it's once or twice a day, to ensure that it's as timely as possible. And I know that SEDEX use that. Of course, the auditor has to have SEDEX noted on their accreditation tab for that information to push across. So we don't push everybody across, only those people that have provided their approval for us to do that. But it's helped them and helped the auditors to be able to download the report to prepare to go out for the audit as well. And I know that they've seen a great reduction in the number of audits that were led by the incorrect level of an auditor. One of the other comments from Alison was that social audits remain a key tool in the business toolbox to ensure third parties and independent assessments of working conditions on site. And whilst by no means are they a silver bullet to guarantee that they'll find all of the hidden issues, they have seen over the years of SMETA audits the data and the issues which are found on sites, and the members now working together to drive that improvement. We know that social audits do come under fire for the issues that they don't find, but they should also be seen as a way to improve the standards, not to state they don't work and should not be included. As part of APSCA and as an industry as a whole, we should be looking at ways that we can share more insight around the good things that social audits do, raise the profile and credibility of the industry, and work with external stakeholders to better provide education and a united front for social audits. So I think Alison kind of summarized what we heard from this team as well. But I also thought it was just important that we also heard from SEDEX, which is another obviously very major player within the profession itself. So unless I think we've really hit most of these questions. I think that we've allocated or we've sort of covered on on a number of different fronts. But I'm just going to ask a bit of a closing question to everybody. Is, what do you see as one of the next steps for APSCA to continue to strengthen the credibility and to meet stakeholder expectations? And when I say that when I say APSCA, it's also APSCA as well as all of our partners, whether it's the audit firms, collaborative programs, brands or retailers through our stakeholder board and beyond, because this really does need to be working together. This isn't something that one particular company or organization or group can do on their own. I think we need to just hear from you. What do you see some of the next steps that we can take together? And I'll start with Janet because you're next to me.
Okay, so I think I'm gonna say group it again around the 3 points that I think are critical for APSCA in coordination and closely working together with organizations like we have here on the panel. So it's ensuring and enhancing the professionalism, creating more capacity. We hear, I don't think we mentioned that too much. I know about the availability of auditors, but that's also driving costs, and that's not helping our industry. So if we can create maybe some more creative solutions around also making social auditing as a profession and recruiting already at schools, universities, etc. It is linked to that first objective on enhancing the professionalism. I think you're really going down into the level of the individual auditor, wondering if there is, what I'm hearing from my colleagues, if there is a bit of also, the level at the firm. Some of the things that come up as root causes or issues are not necessarily only the capacity of an individual auditor, but also do the firms have sufficient systems in place for internal trainings, checks and balances, etc. And then also the third one was really trying to see if we can, in the interest of all of us, I think, create a better reputation for social auditors in general, which does mean going out there, talk to people who may be not necessarily as friendly to us as they come across in their reports and their articles, but try to hear them and see what we can improve and also educate them what all the good work that we are already doing. Having said that, that's say APSCA and the member firms, but not ignoring say what we can do. And I'm with Linda saying it's more about connecting the dots and opening the right channels. And we have a lot of feedback channels that maybe we can bring together and see who can do what. Maybe closing my remark, I normally don't do it when I'm on panels, but it was just the occasion. This morning I was on the train on the ICA, and I happened to be from the Netherlands to here, and I was sitting very close to two gentlemen, and they were talking about non-compliances, talking about corrective actions. So I was asking them between the calls that I was doing on the train, are you in any way going to the APSCA conference? No, they had somehow heard of it, and I did a bit of advertisement for you. But they're working for a scheme in Germany, so hopefully they will come on board soon. But I was impressed by, say, the diligence they were taking in discussing without any names, so they didn't cross any privacy issues, but discussing between themselves about the pieces of evidence, about their judgment on whether this was a minor or a major non-conformity. And it just reminded me how, say, we have such good people out there, and it's such a profession in the sense you need technical skills, interpersonal skills, good value judgment, and now also much more, say, contact skills about legislation, about local situations. So it would be such an opportunity if we are able to turn back that conversation and do, as an industry, just stress how valuable, not as the only solution, but one piece of that puzzle in terms of what's all coming towards us.
Just before I hand over to Abadis, I mean, it's a really interesting comment you made, and actually throughout this year, Andrea and I have actually done a number of presentations to various universities as we've been trying to spread the news about, you know, social compliance auditing actually is a profession, right? It is something that that we want people to start aspiring to. And we've often done our presentations, you know, that social compliance auditors really should almost wear a cape, right? They should be a superhero. They are expected to have such a broad range of knowledge and experience to go out and conduct these audits, right? You know, you think about everything that falls in the competency framework, and it is a huge amount. They don't have to be an expert in every one of those categories, right? But they have to understand at a very, very broad range. So I think that's something that is important, you know, I know as Andrea and I have made our various presentations, that we have explained that to people, that, you know, you really have to have a broad range. And even as we talk to other people about what experience, you know, what is people's background, where do they come from? Everybody's got their own idea about what's the best background to act. Is it having a poli-sci degree? You know, is it being manufacturing degree? You know, what exactly is it that brings that right level of knowledge and experience? So it's very interesting. And we've been getting really good response. I mean, when I know a few of them after we've presented, you get the LinkedIn requests from the people that participated. They come back and ask a lot of questions later. So it is actually quite encouraging, but I think it's spreading the word that we actually, you know, are here. I had a call yesterday from somebody saying that they wanted to participate in one of our training courses on training social workers for child abuse and you know, is more from a social worker perspective. So we were having that conversation about how that's actually not what we do. And it was quite an unusual one. Normally I get calls to come help pick up 100 cats or something that are lost because they misunderstand us for being the animal society. But, you know, and then it can often extend to some quite long conversations with people about what we actually do and how I can maybe provide them a phone number of somebody else that they can call. But you know, I do want to hear from the rest of you on some of your closing comments. I just wanted to add to that. Are you going to use that one?
Sure. Yeah. So at the risk again of agreeing too much, I really think Jeanette put it beautifully. I don't think there is, I mean, 100% accurate and really not much to add at that level. What I would contribute, hopefully, is take it up to a sort of more meta level and answer the question: what should APSCA do? Right? When you look at the sort of specific examples Jeanette gave, these are all important at this point in time. But this is a point in time. APSCA will continue to evolve. We had a whole Evolving Landscapes panel. So we are going to keep seeing APSCA's role change, as it has already changed over the course of the 7 years of existence. In that sense, APSCA's mission remains the one constant, right? To professionalize the space. And it's in some ways akin to saying, you know, APSCA's job is to be a good parent, right? What good parenting looks like when the kid's a baby versus when they're a toddler versus when they're a teenager are not the same things, right? Some you let stay up after 9, and that will be good parenting. Some it will be bad parenting if you did that. So that's the role of APSCA. We have to professionalize the space. Initially, it involves a lot of some of the groundwork that we've laid for the exams and for the qualification pieces. The next stage has been very aptly described, as Jeanette just did, in terms of engagement, in terms of promotion, in terms of creating this reputation for this industry. Beyond that, we will go to another new terrain that will involve, again, another stage of evolution. The central point in all this is to keep in mind the need to professionalize the space and serve that North Star. And you know, that's the one constant, as I said, that will remain, and the manifestation of it will take on different forms. For the moment, for this next step, absolutely. We are at a point, as you've heard from the previous panel, where there is so much interest in this space from so many different directions, not many of whom, or maybe not most of whom, actually know about APSCA. understand about the role APSCA can, does, should, must play in this space. So that's got to be a key facet. At the same time, you also heard from that panel and from this one that there are capacity constraints. There are questions about how are we going to get all these audits done. So how do we create that pipeline? How do we allow folks who are in the space to validate their credentials and proceed to provide those services? So these are kind of the practical elements that we have to focus on right now. But again, the big picture is professionalize the space, make it be something that people aspire to, make it be something that they want to have a career in, and make it be something that they might not actually have that cape, but it feels like they do.
Yeah, a lot has been said. You said it brilliantly, Edviges, you said it brilliantly. And one thing that I picked up and a word that I noted down after your example about what happened in the train is that we have, you talk about professionalism, but we have so many people with passion. And I think passion, is so important in whatever you do. And we have so many others who have this passion. And why do they have that passion? Because they view that this is also work with purpose. So maybe, coming back to the 3 Ps, professionalism, passion and purpose. I think, if that's what we would be able to move forward and then articulate that in a well manner and better engage with the stakeholders that matter, whether that's legislator, whether that's a positive, critical, say, NGOs, a civil society, to bring that message across, I think it would then be, say, our North Star.
Everything has been said. So just to summarize, I would say that we have to make the job attractive. And I've already said that too many audit firms told me this year that they are missing candidates, they have recruitment issues. We have sometimes in different countries audit firms that are all depend on the same freelance auditors, so the capacity are very limited in different countries. So we have to help the auditors on the day-to-day basis, and then we have to provide them with trainings, with understanding of the purpose of the social audit. And the social audit is the main tool to open the door, is still the main tool, whatever is the criticism, is still the main tool to open the door of the factory, and when the factory is closed, it's worst.
Great, thank you very much. There are a few questions that are still on here, but please note, as we've looked at them, that we will be adding those to the list of things that we consider as far as next steps. There's some questions on here about, reviewing the number of questions that are on the various audits and the amount of time. And I think that's something that as we sit down next year as collaborative programs and sort of talk about how can we just improve, is there, some other steps that we can take, we'll add many of those questions to that conversations that we have. But I just want to thank each one of you very much for a very interesting panel. I think there's a few other questions that we didn't necessarily get a chance to cover, but I think the ones that we were able to get through in what we said was going to be going to feel like it was a little bit long. I think it actually went quite quickly as well. So thanks very much to Carol, Linda, Edviges, and Janet as well. And thanks to everybody for submitting your questions and for all your participation. So have a good day.